know that we don't need any formal introduction for the man that we call Bucky, who's known to the world as R. Buckminster Fuller. And we certainly do not need any kind of biographical sketch to discuss his accomplishments. I would like to say a few words, though, about that part of Mr. Fuller that we know in the educational world that perhaps the people outside the educational environment don't get to see. Here is a man who is thoroughly dedicated to the conviction that the education of men's minds is the development of the most powerful tool on earth. He makes this point in so many ways, certainly using the industrial capability as a means of solving problems. But there is no one that I know of who has spent his entire life dedicated to that one major objective, the development of the highest capability of man's intellect. It is with this in mind that we have started this seminar, so that we may bring not only to our own students here, but to all students and all peoples everywhere in the world, this great man.
Early in this century, Alfred North Whitehead came to Cambridge, Massachusetts from England and started as a professor of physics and philosophy at Harvard, and he said many important things. Whitehead is possibly one of the last of the comprehensive establishing a new pattern. This new pattern was the establishment of graduate schools. I imagine it would be almost news to you that graduate schools were something new as short a time ago as just a half a century ago. At any rate, this was the beginning of such graduate schools at Harvard, and then they became established in many other of the big universities. They were all private universities that first had them, and then the state college and universities began to establish the graduate schools. That's so prevalent today that, I'm sure it's news to you that it's a very recent matter. He said this because he himself, coming from the great universities in England, was familiar with the fact that even though men became specialists and developed extraordinary capabilities, they did it as students within the general university complex as established. Oxford and Cambridge didn't have any graduate school of medicine or engineering. And so what Harvard first established was the medical school, and then its law school, and its then the business school, engineering, science school, and so forth. Exercising the greatest possible discipline of accuracy in observing the data with which he worked. And each one would become aware then that as he had become a specialist, that he had progressed to that great specialization through a very careful trail of carefully observed data. And each one would become increasingly aware, even within his school, as he became an important specialist, he would become aware of how little any other man anywhere in the everyday life would understand his particular subject, because he knew that he had had the special advantage of observing these very special data. And in fact, as he observed that data, thinking is much more much larger geographically than is the building of an automobile plant, which does take in quite a lot of territory, but road making takes in much more territory. In fact, we find that the larger the physical undertaking, it is apparent that the lower the grade of intellectual capability that attacks the problem. And when we begin then to get to living at the time when the British Empire had spread completely around the earth. This is the first time in the history of man when empire was really known to surround the total earth. It was not able to govern in any important way in the North Pole, South Pole, because he hadn't gone there. There was a kind of open ends in the system, but there were no men there, so that there was nobody there to govern. And it did really then surround the earth. And the British had their economic agents, their bankers and so forth in all lands around the earth. And these economic representatives were reporting back to England out and they're going to die. So what Darwin was saying, what Malthus was saying, was suddenly a very dire kind of an information. He's providing very extraordinary information to the of luck or do-goodism, and what they were finding out was that all had been said in various religions, for instance, by great leaders about very altruistic strategies of man, where individuals will look out for the other man, the golden rule, do unto others as you would that should do unto you. They began to realize that this was very fine for all those who were going to survive, but it was not a universal rule, and it was going to be you or me in the end. And so you hope it won't be in such a manner that it probably won't be your state. But on the other hand, there are the outs who realize that this is going on, and the word gets around about the secret strategy that there isn't not going to be enough to go around, and that one big state is forming up, and groups of allies are forming up to look out for themselves, and it looks like we're being counted out. And there are a great many others who have been counted out. Why don't we form together and see if who's going to be the boss? Maybe we could take away the leadership. So we're going to have the great ins and outs of the great statecraft and the great battles of the last century and a half to 2 centuries of Europe and the world. Predicated on the fact then that you'll be very polite with one another up to the last moment. You hope you feel badly about the other fellow going to have to die, but because if he has to do without, he's going to die prematurely. It's not going to happen right overnight, but he's going to die 30 years short of his real potential and so forth. He's going to starve off and have diseases. So I will point out that there is in this major constructive things within your economy in the way of developing power dams and so forth that seemingly produce energy wealth for man, but unless you can protect it, the other fellow's going to come in and take it over, and he's going to just assign you to not enoughness, and you're all through. So weaponry becomes something that representatives of the people, though their intellectual level is relatively low, they know that they've been put into their position to keep their side out of trouble. Therefore, a defense advantage is mandatory amongst the leaders. They know that. They don't have to have special sessions and they don't have referendums to the people as to whether they want to be protected. They've been put there to secure the people whom they represent. So they are then suddenly makes possible more and more people surviving a little longer. You do more in your medicine. So since World War I, some very extraordinary things have happened, for instance, in America. I was in the class of 1917 at Harvard. We were a war class. It was the year it was 1917. That's the war was declared. And there were 700 in my class, and out of the class, only 45 were there at graduation time because the whole class had gone off in the war. And I can tell you some statistics about our class we found very interesting. When we theoretically were to graduate in the class of 1917, we ended college in 1913, so the war began in Europe in 1914, so many of the class went off to it before the United States went in 1917. When we were theoretically going to graduate in 1917, the average age of the class would have been 22 years. Which was the first integrating of the total potentials of everything men had learned about all of the physical universe, as developed by great specialists who are unable to integrate their capabilities and their knowledge, but whose findings were integrated as of the great funding, enormous expenditures of World War I, and then anticipating a World War II, and then anticipating World War III, the mandate to the defensive expenditure is so great, and the complexity of the tooling has become so great, and the knowledge of all men around the earth regarding the fact that you're at all times dealing in all the earth and all the resources around the earth. The resources are not to be just found in any one country, that you have to go to all the earth to get them. This ever more comprehensive frame of reference has forced men to, as political leaders, with this negative mandate of you or me, to fund very broad systems undertakings, weapon systems undertakings, to get into putting out, as we know, you're familiar in your day with defense budgets for a year, $40 billion, quite a lot of dough. It's quite a lot of dough, with only 7% of humanity in America. And we're handing out $40 billion just to fund the producing of something that's never been produced before. We're going to try out what the specialist is saying to you. I think we now safely say to you, you can have this thing which is a little hotter, a little sharper, or a little stronger. You put those together in your complex, and you ought to get enormously better results. The $40 billion we're spending on defense is for then integrating of those new potentials. And every time we integrate newer potentials, we spread the base of those who are learning thereby that there is within these relatively few years of man on earth, here are these curves are doing more with less. And the greater expectancy of man is going to live longer and healthier. These curves are so powerful that suddenly even a very dull politician can look at them and say, it looks like we might be enough to go around one of these days. Now, the politicians are so dull that they don't realize that the only reason that they have their mandate is because it is on the basis there isn't enough to go around. There's no organized political action today to say, we will now deliberately give up the weaponry and we'll turn the total potential into making man a success, because there is now developed a whole set of tooling, organization of the resources of man that had not occurred until the weaponry was undertaken at this enormous magnitude. There's nobody to say, I now give you an authority to spend money on positive undertakings. I've given a word I call living rate to a total kind of an undertaking which would be, we have some seemingly scientific information here, which tells us it is you or me. What could you do? There are two main theories. One was the theory that begins to develop in socialism. That is, that what you'll do is there's not enough to go around, but everybody will get 3/4 of what he needs, or he gets 3/5 of what he needs. That is, you go in for austerity where you'll all starve and die and rot slowly together, and nobody feels he's better than the other fellow because you both died 40 years short of your span. Or there's the other thing which says there's not going to be enough to go around, and it's a miserable affair for everybody to be just dying slowly together in inadequacy. So the other thing we could do is to simply, let's get to an issue and we'll shoot it out, and we'll kill off all those who can't be taken care of. That was really more or less the way it used to operate in the days of the ignorance regarding Malthus, but in the terms of what seemed to be a local world, a whole world, the Mediterranean world. You'll find the battles in those of you who visit Greece or visit the different parts of the earth. As I visit Greece, I'm sure you'll participate with me in the strange feeling of the extraordinary excellence of the thinking that could go into and the creativeness that could go into sculptures and into organizational games and so forth. But also you are you're stunned by really a brutality of way of having to survive, which when you go to the island of Delos, you find as the Athenians win, they put 30,000 people to the sword. They wipe out everybody. The other side goes out. You don't have to worry about there's enough in their area, and they might think Thompson trying to find out his secret, and then we'll design inside the company what are called brain picking. That goes on a very great deal in relation to the world of design. But I would say that we have here a realization that all the change is occurring by virtue of conscious designing of men. I spoke to you of the coordination, phenomena called coordination. I'd like to make a break. We've been at this just 1 hour, and I think that it's a good idea if we would. These were not the public schools, these are the private schools. And the public schools hadn't started developing these graduate schools at the time. Later on they did follow, because again, the politician, the man representing the people, very sensitive to what they think they want, and he's very sensitive to the fact that people think that their misfortunes and their lack of ability to get on a little better, which they don't want their children to suffer, has a great deal to do with just schooling, education, literacy. They see that the ones who seem to be successful have had more knowledge and therefore taken advantage of having more knowledge. So that politicians found providing of education for his populace something that the people will always be for, and quite independent of what does it cost. So I'm glad if you do. But I have the floor, and I have been doing this for a long time, and I've been doing it with so many students that I've been corrected a great many times by people who do know something, know better than I, and so I represent more or less of an integration of a corrected process that is speaking. And when I go sketching very large accounts, such as I'm going to make now, it's my own interpretation of history. I know that it is my own tentative one, yet I've learned that it also is very useful to get up some kind of a scaffolding. In the history of man's undertakings, the scientific history of man's undertakings, there's hardly any instance of important scientific discoveries in which the entrance into the set of events that and J.P. Morgan had provided it, and they mastered General Motors, United States Steel. Really, the big corporations in America were all run by them. Now, these men were world bankers. And your disciplines, your way, your secrets of how you run the earth. How do you hold your position? I say you would be apprehensive of the bright ones displacing you and not the dull ones. There's an old strategy, a very, very old strategy, which is divide and conquer. Also, there's a very important strategy which is anticipating. In fact, the essence of strategy is anticipation. So anticipatory divide and conquer would be a very logical kind of thinking, wasn't it? You would supposing all the possible people who might someday, you see them building up incipiently, who might displace you. If you divide those people anticipatorily before they even think of getting together, you arrange things so they don't tend to think of getting together, then you don't have to divide them, and you stay on top. So I would say then the anticipatory divide and conquer of the brightest would become a basic strategy. I'm not at all surprised that these masters thought of the idea then of saying that certainly at the schools, in schools we have the process where you are sifting out the brightest. Supposing then we deliberately take the brightest of the schools and make them specialists. By doing so, 3/4 of the earth is water. When I put this face towards you, you can see almost all water. And with 3/4 of the earth's surface water, and only 1/4 of it land, and the lands very greatly divided from one another, and with enormous water fronts, quite clearly also the resources were unevenly divided over the face of the earth, because there was iron here and manganese there and gold in another place. They were not evenly divided. They were unevenly divided. And because they were unevenly divided, and because the various chemical elements can be used in complementary ways as alloys and so forth, providing higher and higher performance, there was a necessity of people, as the new kinds of tools were being developed, to obtain resources that were remote from their own unique lands. The integration of the Earth's resources occurs primarily by virtue of the sea, of ships. If you think about it, ships, and that the trees will stay on top of the water, and you can carry cargoes, dry cargoes from here to there. It doesn't take much of your thinking to reflect about and realize how little weight you can carry on your own back beside the weight you could carry in a raft that you could push along by the bank of the river. Or if you got out there and let the wind just blow it, if the wind will get you from here to there with a very great weight. All you have to do is to build the raft and load it, and you can carry enormous weights, much more weight than you could carry in the backs of men or the backs of animals. And if you try to get resources from here to there with backs of animals and backs of men, you find yourself immediately going back in the hinterland to go up around the head of the river and so forth, and you find yourself up in the mountains, and you're in very rough going. The amounts of resources that could be transported by men over the land, it was relatively negligible in comparison to what they discovered they could carry by water. So the great commerce of history has been on the water. And the shortest distance between this remote place here and here is by water. You can go under the water and carry enough air with you and so forth to be able to survive and could motor underwater. So that the challengers to the old masters said, we're going to go underwater and we're going to waylay, and they want to get this kind of goods out of this land, and they want to move it to another place and associate it with other kinds of goods, and make various kinds of products that have suddenly much higher value by the association, and then they market that in a place where people have enough credit to buy it. So they pick the small portion of the earth that's going to be having, which we could say that people are going to, with as you or me kind of conditions, the me side would be relatively small side, let's say the Western European world. And you say, I can sell my goods there because they have higher credit. And so you make head people at various parts of the world. And you say, you can be king here and you can be king here. Or if you don't like the name king, we'd call it something else. But you can be head man here. And I'll see that you're head man, because if anybody ever challenges you, you get in, the land battles are battles really of fortresses and siege. And the man who's challenging you, we're just going to see, because we control the seas, he's just not going to get supplies. So he might challenge you, might be tough boys and good weapons, but you just can't stay there, man, you can command them. And all of this is pouring down to the waterfront and going into this shipyard to build a ship, which takes a long time to build. And so it's very much an evidence that you're building a ship and that you're risking all of the wealth of your kingdom. So every in has his out, and there's the opposite who said, well, this boy is making fine time here building this ship, and he's putting all the resources in. He has the sword, he commands the country. But I think there'd be a very easy way to, and we're going to make some beautiful daggers and things. We're going to discipline ourselves to handle those daggers very well, and we're just going to take this boat over. So it's much easier than all this trouble of building the ship and going long distance, simply to take the ship over. So piracy became quite obviously a promising scheme. And piracy became popular all around the earth. And piracy became so popular that 5 centuries ago, when we have some they did, the other fellow would go there. You've been exploring. You found out such and such are there. Keep it to yourself. The stories of the pirate treasures, they are very, very familiar. But it was true of the masters themselves, who just didn't let anybody know where anything was. And the fact that the British Isles, as headquarters for the masters of the water ocean, as they had their fleets there, but their fleets were unable to protect themselves against this invisible new enemy who was going underwater. Their fleets had all been designed to meet people on the surface of the water. That had been the long discipline. And so this new enemy coming underwater was so debilitating the old masters that they looked like the old masters of the new tools. They hadn't invented the tools. The tools had been invented in Europe and Asia long before. But they had been moved into America to exploit the waterfalls, the water power, and the coal and so forth. They're brand new land, enormous new resources. Great investments were made in tools which were put over here, which had, no invested interest beyond just being new tools. In back here, you had some very good tools, but they get so involved in pledges and mergers of interests as to be sometimes held really ineffective. And the new theater, with its tools, had broken away from the old world and had started to use its tools with respect to enormous resources itself. In fact, the workers using those tools had really, in effect, taken those tools over when the United States revolted from England's control. And we had developed an enormous productivity in North America. And the old masters said, the only way we can save our skins here is to tap this great productivity of North America, the industrial productivity of North America and all its resources, and keep the submarine menace down to a considerable extent. So the United States Navy it never mounted, we've had some nice battles. We won our independence, but we were anything but masters of the earth with the kind of navies we had with just a few little ships. The United States Navy, as of World War I, was suddenly treated by the Grand Master's Navy, which is the British Navy, as an equal, not as an inferior. And the United States Naval Academy was a place where all the secrets of the grand strategy of British Navy were, anything that was really worth using, the technology changing rapidly, was being taught to the young man at the Naval Academy. Suddenly, we were given all the secret information that the grand strategy of really, that anything that's worthwhile in the navies of all history, which had now gotten all concentrated in the British Navy, was suddenly being poured at us as a group of young men. I said it's very interesting that we were being told just Navy, we're not having to bother with English or German or languages or any of the liberal arts. We were simply getting straight Navy, and we really learned more about Navy than did people who went into Navy as a naval officer getting the general liberal arts course. And we had been out at sea, and we had good reason to want to understand the Navy, because we had been in actions. So I do think it was a very extraordinary kind of moment, and I was very excited, I'm sure many others were, but I was so excited that I never forgot about it. By the things that I began to learn about grand strategy. If I talk to you about grand strategy the way I do, it's because I was suddenly found myself being faced with a grand strategy. I'd been let in. And there were only relatively a few hundred of us being conducted in England, at Greenwich. And it was very interesting because it happened to differ with what Whitehead had been talking about is going on in the private universities and the kind of experience I had had myself at Harvard. Because at the Naval Academy in England, and now at the Naval Academy in America, as World War I, you deliberately picked out all the brightest, every kind of examination it had, you could think of to pick out which are the bright ones, and you deliberately set about to make the brightest comprehensive men instead of specialists. This seemed to be a very, very exciting work. You harvested every single thing that all men in all history had been known to have found out about physical universe. What are the rules that are operative? What is science? Science itself was not only then harvested, but it was taken from a subjective study and made into an objective design activity. And this Navy was a fabulously comprehensive, anticipatory undertaking. It was something that was going